in this case would be us, I guess the reactionaries, hold them to their values because no one lives up to their values. I don't live up to even my values, the ones I hold up. I try, but I'm always going to fail. But they have no holds, and that's what you saw this week. And that's why freedom of speech is truly, truly, truly in danger in this country. And with that, as freedom of speech goes over the edge, freedom itself goes because no one will be willing to dissent because of the cost. And that's why, I have to laugh because they will call Mr. Trump a Nazi. He is not a Nazi. He does not espouse National Socialist values, all right, as espoused by Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler and especially Goebbels, the propaganda minister, who himself and his wife, when they decided life after the Fuhrer could not be worth living for anyone, they were so dedicated that they murdered their 5 children before committing suicide using cyanide. That's how crazy this is. Mr. Trump does not espouse Nazi-type values. But the preventing of people to speak, the bullying of people when they try to speak, the shouting them down, the using epithets, mobs running through the street like the brown shirts, the SA in Germany, that is pure Nazi behavior because that's precisely what the Nazis did in Germany. I am right now, I like to say reading, but I usually listen to audiobooks. I am doing a biography, very well done, of Reinhard Heydrich, who was number 2 in the SS under Heinrich Himmler. And, of course, Heydrich was the architect of the final solution along with Adolf Eichmann. They were just carrying out the mandate at the Wannsee Conference. Remember that Heydrich was assassinated, I think, let me see here, January, February, March, April, May, 4 months later in Czechoslovakia. He was assassinated. And to watch what they did to shut up their opposition and to finally round them up finally and get them into concentration camps when they couldn't beat them up in the streets or shoot them or murder them on certain nights, that's where the elite is heading right now. That's real Nazi behavior. And that's why we have to keep insisting on freedom of speech in this country, because if you don't do that, there won't be a free society. And so many today are devoid of the knowledge of that history, especially the millennials, that they sling these terms around, but they have not a clue of what it truly, truly means, and that their behavior much more accurately models how the Nazis behaved. Wasn't much difference between the communists and the Nazis. They like to say, well, communism's on the left and Nazism's on the right, and fascism. Not really true. Imagine a circle. At the top is freedom, and at the bottom is tyranny. You can go down the left side of the circle and call it communism. You can go down the right side of the circle and call it fascism. But when you get to the bottom, they both look the same. No freedom, no free speech, concentration camps, and a secret police. We got to be careful, everybody. We'll be back. Like us on Facebook. We're at SteelOnSteel.com, where online subscribers can hear our weekly intelligence brief that follows this program as well. I'm John Lufter. The program is Steel on Steel. Recently, the death of a terminally ill 17-year-old boy made headlines. This was Belgium's first case of child euthanasia. What's interesting is that there was such a fuss being made about it because the Netherlands has long allowed minors to receive euthanasia upon request. A Dutch law, children down to 16 years of age can receive euthanasia without their parents' consent, and they can be killed by doctors with parental consent starting at age 12. This is what I call mission creep. Just as in Obamacare, we're going to see mission creep now as you're watching it unravel financially. Sooner or later, decisions are going to have to be made as to who or whom receives or does not receive medical care. Let's talk about this whole thing. Wesley Smith is back with us here. He's a senior fellow at the Discovery Institute and program chair of their Center on Human Exceptionalism. And he's author of 12 books, including Culture of Death, The Age of Do-Harm Medicine, that came out this year. So what's new about this particular event in Belgium? And, of course, the U.S. is dragging behind Europe in this, so we could at least take a lesson from it.
Nothing is new. In fact, there have been minors euthanized before, as you mentioned. The Netherlands permits age 16 and up to be euthanized, and it doesn't require terminal illness either, without parental consent. And then from 12 up, Dutch doctors are allowed to kill children with parental consent if they qualify for euthanasia in terms of having an illness or a serious disability. Also in the Netherlands, there's no question that babies are killed in their cribs by doctors. That's been happening for many years. It's not technically legal, but it is so open and notorious that Dutch pediatricians have published a bureaucratic euthanasia checklist for babies called the Groningen Protocol. Let me tell you what the checklist is. It says if the baby has no chance of survival, which, by the way, is sometimes misdiagnosed, the baby can be euthanized. The baby may survive after a period of intensive treatment, but expectations for their future are very grim. What does that mean? Basically, some Dutch call it an unlivable life based on disability. Those babies can be and are euthanized. The baby, quote, does not depend on technology for physiologic stability, but is suffering that is considered severe, sustained, and cannot be alleviated. So these are very subjective terms. The idea is that if a baby is born with a terminal condition or a seriously disabling condition, babies are being killed in the Netherlands. And it is so respectful, even though it's not technically legal, and above board that a checklist, a bureaucratic checklist, has been published. And to show you how the world's medical elite are moving, the direction in which they are moving, the Groningen Protocol was published without criticism, with all due respect, in the New England Journal of Medicine.
In other words, it was just taken antiseptically as de facto.
Well, this is just the way they do it in the Netherlands. Realize that one of the reasons some doctors were hanged at Nuremberg was they committed infanticide of disabled children.
What is interesting, by the way, is the values that we used at Nuremberg to judge people, we are now reversing in the West. We need to go back and to apologize to them.
Yeah, and people say, well, that was Nazis. No, that wasn't Nazis. That was eugenics. The Nazis allowed it to occur, but advocacy for infanticide has been going on for decades in eugenics. Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, she was a social Darwinist and a eugenicist. She believed in pulling the pernicious weeds. She wanted infanticide to be acceptable. This is the idea that there's such a thing as a life unworthy of life, and it is coming back again, only this time instead of using really obnoxious terms like the weeds, it is speaking in terms of compassion, but it is the same evil that existed decades ago in the eugenics movement.
You know, I forgot to mention as we started the program here, too, that Colorado has now become, as of this election, the second state to legalize assisted suicide. It's amazing how far Colorado has come since I moved there. Before we got on the air here, we were discussing the changes that have gone on in, I will call it Western civilization, Western culture, about the attitudes towards human exceptionalism, but the fact that the churches, the priests and pastors, don't seem to be reckoning with this. They keep acting as if the world were the same as it was 40 years ago. Let's jump off on that one, because what we're discussing here in a small issue actually can be expanded.
Yeah, the work I do and the reason that the Discovery Institute has me in the Center on Human Exceptionalism is that the real crisis goes beyond what we've just been discussing. The idea of infanticide or child euthanasia is a symptom of a much larger crisis. I started this work in 1993 fighting against assisted suicide, and over time I began to understand that there was actually an overarching threat that was causing the assisted suicide euthanasia problem, the problem in bioethics, which is trying to do away with Hippocratic Oath values in medicine so that elderly people can be deemed to have a lower quality of life than younger people and therefore receive less quality medical treatment. I saw that in animal rights, which we must distinguish from animal welfare is part of human exceptionalism, which is that we have a duty as human beings, as the only known moral species in the universe, to treat animals humanely and properly. That's an obligation on human beings. Animal rights says that humans and animals have equal value and that there is no distinction to be made between us in terms of morality, so that if you own an animal, it's the same thing as slavery. Radical environmentalism calls human beings the cancer on the planet. So you begin to see an overarching theme in many seemingly disparate issues, ranging from euthanasia to bioethics to animal rights to environmentalism, that human beings are the enemy, that we are not special, that in fact we are the vermin species. And that's incredibly dangerous because human exceptionalism, which says each and every individual human being has equal moral worth simply and merely because we are human, that is, it is an objective value, is the predicate for universal human rights. Because if each and every human being isn't inherently equal, then some are going to be deemed more important or more valuable than others. And whenever you accept that mindset, you end up with tyranny, oppression, exploitation, and killing. And so human exceptionalism says we have unique value, and then the flip side of that, because it's more than the sanctity of human life, which is part of it, is the duties aspect. That means we have duties to each other. We have duties to our posterity. When the founders of the United States wrote, they often talked about their posterity. That's us. And they felt that they had a duty to make the United States a freer, better, more prosperous place than it was for them, and they succeeded in that. We have duties to treat animals properly. We have duties to treat the earth in the proper fashion when we exploit the planet and the resources in order to engage in human thriving. Human exceptionalism has both sides of the coin, value and obligation. And unfortunately, what we're losing is the value part. For example, I will mention in a speech, they're trying to make it so that animals can sue. It's called animal standing. And it will only take one judge saying that animals have standing to sue to change the entire relationship between humans and animals. And the audience will often roll their eyes and start to laugh, and I'll say, what's so funny? This is a real and present danger. Lawrence Tribe, who was the Harvard law professor who almost made it to the Supreme Court, believes in animal standing. Peter Singer of Princeton, the bioethicist and jumpstarter of the animal liberation movement, believes in animal standing. More than 100 law schools in the United States have animal rights sections teaching the lawyers of tomorrow how to engage in these lawsuits once animal standing is permitted. So I'll say there's nothing funny about it. The world is not what it was when you grew up. You have to see the world today as it is, and the threat to human equality, the threat to universal human rights, the threat to the idea that there is such a thing as a sanctity of human life is under material threat across a broad array of issues, which is why at the Discovery Institute we started the center.
Yeah, and you notice that we're in a transition zone where, as you said, we get to a point where human life is evaluated not on the sanctity of human life, but on the basis of whether the life is worth living.
Exactly. And the real key, and particularly in secular view, being human isn't what matters, it's eliminating suffering. And once eliminating suffering becomes the primary purpose of society, that very quickly mutates into eliminating the sufferer. And then the concept of what the nature of the suffering that is required to permit the eliminating of the sufferer expands exponentially. So pretty soon we're worried about the earth's suffering. So there's such a thing now, and it is passing in some laws, called nature rights. That is that nature should have rights that are very akin to human rights. It's almost a right to life for nature. 2 countries have already enacted nature rights legislation, Bolivia and Ecuador. More than 30 United States cities have done so, including Santa Monica. Now, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I know you know that area well. There's no nature left in Santa Monica. So why would the city of Santa Monica pass a law that gives rights to nature? Because it's an ideological statement of human unexceptionalism. That's an incredibly dangerous thing to consider. And so we see attempts to throttle the ability for exploitation of natural resources. You see continual lawsuits against animal industries and the food industries. You see mentally ill people in the Netherlands and in Belgium are euthanized as a, quote, treatment for their disease. In Belgium, elderly couples who are not sick have received joint euthanasia to avoid future suffering of grief from widowhood, and including healthy elderly couples. So this is a real crisis in the West that most people don't want to look at because it's a very frightening and very painful prospect. The maxim of the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, is being rejected across a wide canopy of ideological issues today.
And that's why we hear about human rights rather than constitutional rights.
Right. If humans are not all inherently equal, you can't have universal human rights because, in fact, many in bioethics say being human is morally irrelevant to moral worth, and they talk about personhood being the relevant factor in terms of rights. In order to be a person, you have to have minimal cognitive capacities. That's why you will see people ranging from Hillary Clinton on down saying that unborn children are not persons. But neither are infants in this view, because an infant, like a fetus, is not self-aware over time, as one example, isn't able to value his or her own life as another example, and therefore you see the propriety of infanticide promoted in the highest levels of bioethics literature. People like Terry Schiavo are also deemed to be non-persons because of illness or injury. They've lost those capacities. And that's why you see